Hello, I'm Ritika. Welcome to PLN Casefile, Landmark Judgment Vishaka versus State of Rajasthan, 1997. The judgment that changed workplace safety in India. What happens when there is no law to protect women from sexual harassment at the workplace? Can the Supreme Court step in to fill the legal vacuum? In 1997, the Supreme Court answered this question through one of the most influential judgments in Indian constitutional history. Today, we examine Vishaka versus State of Rajasthan, the landmark case that laid the foundation for workplace dignity, gender equality, and what we now know as the POSH law. The background. The case arose after the assault of Bhanwari Devi, a social worker in Rajasthan, who faced violence while performing her official duties. At that time, India had no specific legislation dealing with sexual harassment at the workplace. Concerned about this legal vacuum, a group of women's rights organizations led by Vishaka approached the Supreme Court through a public interest litigation. The court was asked an important constitutional question. Can fundamental rights protect women at the workplace even when Parliament has not enacted a specific law? The Supreme Court's decision. In a landmark judgment, the Supreme Court held that sexual harassment at the workplace violates several fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution, including Article 14, Equality before law, Article 15, Protection against discrimination, Article 19, 1G, Freedom to practice any profession, Article 21, Right to life with dignity. Since no legislation existed at the time, the court framed a set of binding principles known as the Vishaka Guidelines. These guidelines were to operate as law until Parliament enacted appropriate legislation. What were the Vishaka Guidelines? The Vishaka Guidelines required employers to take proactive steps to prevent and address workplace sexual harassment. Key directions included creating a safe working environment, establishing a complaints mechanism, constituting a complaints committee headed by a woman, including an external member to ensure impartiality, conducting awareness and sensitization programs. These guidelines became mandatory across workplaces throughout India. From Vishaka to the POSH Act, the Vishaka Guidelines remained in force for nearly 16 years. In 2013, Parliament enacted the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace, Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act 2013, commonly known as the POSH Act. The Act converted many of the Vishaka Guidelines into statutory law. Today, employers are legally required to constitute an internal committee where applicable, adopt workplace policies, conduct awareness programs, provide an effective grievance redressal mechanism. Failure to comply can attract legal consequences. Why this judgment still matters? Nearly 3 decades later, the Vishaka judgment continues to influence workplace governance in India. It demonstrated that constitutional rights are not limited to courtrooms. They also protect dignity and equality in everyday workplaces. The judgment reminds employers that compliance is not merely a legal obligation, but an essential part of creating safe, respectful, and inclusive work environments. Vishaka versus State of Rajasthan is remembered as a judgment that transformed constitutional values into practical workplace protections. It proved that when the law is silent, constitutional principles can guide justice until Parliament acts. Today, its legacy lives on through the POSH Act and the continuing commitment to workplace dignity and equality. This was PLN Casefile. I'm Ritika. Thank you for watching. Stay connected with PLN India as we continue exploring the landmark judgments that have shaped India's legal landscape.